Okay, so the next element that we want to look at is called image. And if you open up the file image.xaml, you can see here that we've got an image element. Let me go ahead and maximize the screen so we can see the full image. And now let's go ahead and move this up. Okay, so you can see in here we have a really simple element. It's just called image, and we've set two properties on it. The first of those is source, and the source is set to album.jpg. And from that you can infer that source can actually be a relative path. So in this case, album.jpg is a file that's in the same location as our XAML file. And then the other property that we've set here is a property called stretch. And you can see that we've set stretch to a value of uniform. Now stretch is an important property on image because it's really common that you're going to need to stretch the image. This is partly because of the fact that WPF tends to have very dynamic layouts, so you don't always know the size of the space that you're trying to fill. It's also good to know that WPF does a great job with interpolation, so feel free to stretch an image. Generally, if you keep it within reasonable bounds, the image will look pretty good. Now it turns out that uniform is actually the default value for the stretch property. And if the image uses a uniform stretch, you can see what happens. As we change the size of the image stretches in a uniform manner. In other words, the proportions of the image are kept intact. So you can see what happens as I resize that image. Another option for stretch is the value fill. And if we change that, you can see what happens. So once again, let's turn off the auto parse so we don't get the reminder that we've typed something wrong. And I'll do that by clicking this button. And then from now on, we'll need to use F5 every time we want to refresh. So you can see that when I've changed the stretch property to fill, the image is actually just going to fill up the available space. And in this case, we're no longer keeping the original proportions of the image intact. In other words, it's sizing to fill the space regardless of what that size is. Now there are times when you actually want to fill the available space, but you want to keep the original proportions intact as well. The way you can do that is by using a value that combines both uniform and fill. And this is called uniform to fill. Now you can see what happens if I change the stretch property to be uniform to fill. You'll notice now that this is filling up the entire space, but it's doing what it can to keep the original proportions intact. And that means that it's actually clipping the image, so we only see the very top of this image. And by the way, it's also obvious that at this point, this very small image, which is only about 170 by 170 pixels, is actually getting pretty blurry. So at this size, the interpolation really isn't working as well. So finally, in that kind of a case, it might make sense to actually tell the image not to stretch at all. And so the last option that you can use for the stretch property is none. And so if we change this to none, you can see that it will actually keep the original size intact. Okay, so hopefully that gives you kind of a basic understanding of what it is that the image element does. Now I'd like to go ahead and look at the next element, which is text block.